when I realized that the Christian doctrine had been used to, target the Jewish people with such enmity over the years, when I first came across the writings of Martin Luther and his, the lies of the Jews and his attacks on the Jewish people, I was shocked. And this was even after I had read a fair amount about the Holocaust, but I didn't understand about Christian anti-Semitism. At that point, it was a burden to me. And my father, one of the things that he had was that he had a supernatural fear of anti-Semitism, because he understood that he had lost his brother in a war that was largely started by people who hated Jews. And it was in the Pacific Theater, but still he understood that it was part of a larger context. And when I discovered that my church had been, treating Israel as unfairly as it had been, I started to work at the David Project, and to work largely against the divestment resolutions. But at a certain point, it became clear.
And the David Project was
Charles Jacobs and some other people founded the David Project, I believe, in 2002.
Charles Jacobs, a Jewish.
Yeah, he's a prominent Jewish activist here in Boston.
We've had him on the show, actually, and interviewed him recently.
And he basically said there's an ideological attack on Israel, and we need to respond to it. And I started to work at the David Project in 2005, and I was there for a year and a half, largely in response to the divestment resolutions. But as time passed, I realized that it wasn't just the divestment resolutions. It was the books, it was the articles, it was the websites, it was all of this plethora of, it was a tsunami, actually, of anti-Israel invective coming from these churches. So I made the move to come work at Camera. And one of the oddest things for me to tell somebody is that it seems to be the most Christian thing for me to do, to basically help mount a defense of the Jewish people in their homeland. And one of the things that we have to understand is that, the Jewish people are burdened with the sign of the Jew. It's like the mark of Cain. And it's a sign that's been applied to them like a smudge pot on their forehead, from a number of different sources. And at this point, when you look at that mark of Cain and how it plays out, you have to wonder, the Jewish people, the continued existence of them is still a mystery. There was a writer after the Holocaust by the name of Emil Fackenheim who basically said, is it ethical for us to pass on our Jewish identity to our children, given the consequences that it's going to have for them in the lives that they lead?
And many Jews have opted to change their names and hide their background even from the children.
Right. And the answer that he gave was, yes, it is, because we can't give Hitler any more victories by leaving the Jewish faith or the Jewish identity. And when you understand that, all of a sudden you realize, look, a lot of people may have eschatological beliefs about the Jewish people and whether or not they're going to accept Jesus Christ as their Messiah and their Lord. The thing is that if that were to take place, as a Christian, I do not want that to take place at the end of a knife blade or at the point of a gun.
That's not conversion at all.
Yeah, that's not that's not right. And so ultimately, I have pretty much decided to put, the fate of the Jewish people into the hands of God. I don't have to peer into his mind. I don't have to know. I honestly do not have to know. But what I can do is basically look at the injustice and the hostility that's directed at them and say, this is wrong.
So really what you're saying is that what motivates you as a Christian and as a person of genuine desire for justice is not so much the spiritual dimensions of perhaps Jews converting to Christianity and so on and so forth, but truly this is an issue of sheer justice.
Right, and also the credibility of the Christian faith. And this is one of the issues.
No desire necessarily for conversion, although that may be something that's in your heart, but that's not the
issue,
primary motive.
And I don't proselytize in any way, shape, or form, but one of the things that I want to make clear to people is that the credibility of the Christian faith is at stake. Because the proffer of Christ's love for humanity, in many respects, has been tied in with such a hostile message about the Jewish people. And I think we have to be very careful about that and say, look, we can't we have to figure out a way to be able to offer up that message without, engaging in anti-Jewish polemics. And I think we can. And there's another issue at stake is that Christian supersessionism makes it harder for us to respond to Muslim supersessionism regarding Christianity.
Supersessionism, please.
Supersessionism you might understand it as replacement theology, the notion that the church has replaced the Jewish people,
and that God has no more dealings with the Jews in a special way, essentially.
And the thing is that for me, to me to believe that would mean that basically God's promises are not reliable. And if they aren't reliable to the Jews, then how do I know that they're reliable to me?
God's promises in the Old Testament,
right.
The Old Testament scriptures, the pact that he established with Abraham, which was irrevocable in a way, and where God says, hey, if a woman can forget the son of her womb, in that way I would be able to forget you, Israel. His assertions of love on behalf of Israel seem to be absolutely irrevocable.
And we need to make sure that we don't interpret like the violence done against Jews by our fellow humans. We can't interpret the Holocaust as a bill of divorce from God towards the Jewish people, because that basically portrays God in pretty monstrous terms. And
now here, let me add an element of complexity, because at the same time, I read one of your articles, by the way, just recently, regarding the whole issue of supersessionism, and sometimes the impulse on the part of many Christians to blame persecution of the Jews and all the suffering that Jews have experienced over the centuries to the fact that they have denied the Messiah, as we understand Jesus. And so that there's some kind of punishment on the part of God, which has been expressed in all this persecution, the Holocaust, and so on and so forth. And you react very strongly against that. How can we, though, prevent ourselves from engaging in the same kind of oversimplification that we accuse those who are anti-Semitic of, in the sense that even among Israelis themselves and among Jews themselves, there is a certain amount of dialogue and of criticism, of internal criticism about the rebelliousness of the Jews, the hard-heartedness. And even in the scriptures you see that God himself, Jehovah, as we use that term, angry and absolutely enraged at the ingratitude of his people, and their rebelliousness and their pride, and the fact that he often accompanied that anger with persecution by other nations and ultimately by exile, and so on and so forth. So even within the Jewish scriptures, you do see a strong element of criticism of this nation, even as God himself professes love. Sometimes in the same breath, he expresses anger and absolute rage over this rebelliousness of this teenage son, and at the same time, his absolute passionate love and his kind of not knowing what to do with these two powerful energies within his heart. And even today in Israel, there are the very orthodox elements of Judaism, criticizing Israeli secular society and feeling that, hey, we shouldn't even be here yet. Right. And enraged at the secularism, even the atheism and the humanism of so much of Israeli society, and saying, you guys are essentially heretics. And so I'm saying that I understand what your point, which is that sometimes we have used the hard-heartedness of the Jews to justify persecution, which absolutely is out of the question. It's anti-biblical. I repudiate that. But at the same time, it is important to understand the complexity, the internal complexity, and that there are elements, the fact that, I see Jesus standing, for example, right near his point of crucifixion in one of the moving passages of the Gospels, where he says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I've wanted to cover you as a hen covers its chicks and protect you, and you did not want it. It says, you who stoned the prophets, and therefore now your land is left desolate. This is from the words of Jesus himself as portrayed in the Gospels. And so, there is this element within Christianity also But it's not one that justifies. You know, when Jesus says that, he says it in extreme love and sadness, because he can't cover his very own people that he loves so much. And what he's showing is the dilemma of God himself, who loves his people desperately, and at the same time he sees them flee from the protection that he wants to put over them. So it's a very complex issue. And all I'm saying that we need to acknowledge that even as we profess this profound love, which we need to have as Christians for God's special people, he does have a special plan for them.